Hey guys, welcome to Davis Virtual Class of Excellence. Today we're going to be talking about discovering Florida's watershed. We're going to kind of look at Jacksonville locally and then go outward into the entire Floridian aquifer. So it's going to kind of examine our area and then going outward because we have a large watershed in Florida and it's very unique and very special. I'm excited to teach this to you, especially now that some of the COVID-19 restrictions are being lifted. You're able to go to the beach for a limited amount of times. They're opening up certain parks. So you guys can start enjoying our watershed more. If you're lucky enough to have a boat or a kayak, or you live near one of the creeks or rivers near us, you might be already enjoying the watershed. And it's important to know because this is how you get your drinking water. This is where the water that you brush your teeth with, shower, wash your clothes, this is where all your water is coming from. And we get a lot of rain in Florida. We're a subtropical climate. So it's important to know where our water goes, because if you know where water comes from, you can figure out the best way to access water and how to keep your water clean, which is super important. So we're just going to focus on all of Florida's watershed today, and then we're going to get into human impact, contaminants, things like that later in the week. All right. So what is a watershed? It's the definition is kind of in the name. A watershed is an area of land that feeds all the water running under it and draining off of it into a body of water. So long story short, when it rains, where does all your water go? Okay, it's going to go down these hills, which we don't have a lot in Florida. It's going to store and flow into rivers. Okay, it's gravity. Okay, but that gets a little funky when you look at the St. Johns River, because if you think gravity, it's going to go downwards. But the St. Johns River flows the opposite direction because, like I said, Florida's flat. There's not a lot of hills. I mean, when you think hills, Florida, you're thinking closer to Georgia, and you're thinking maybe Tallahassee is where there's technically hills. I mean, I don't consider them hills. I don't know, they're mounds compared to what I'm used to in New York, but still. So the watershed also will combine watersheds to form a network of rivers and streams that progressively drain into a large water area. So, for example, the Great Lakes up north in Canada and New York, Ohio, Minnesota, those are all connected to a Great Lake, Lake Erie, Lake Superior, Lake Ontario. My dad actually lives on Lake Ontario. He can literally see Canada from his house. Like, sends me a picture on a clear, like, look, there's Canada. I'm like, that's cool. Must be nice to live on a watershed. And we're going to talk about that watershed later because it's actually pretty fascinating, something that happened to Lake Erie. So it's not necessarily always flowing into the ocean, it's flowing into a large body of water. Okay, Lake Ontario is so big, it's between two countries, which is pretty crazy. So our watershed primarily flows into, obviously, the ocean. That's the largest body of water near us. We're a peninsular, that makes sense. All right. So these type of maps tell us how water flows. So for example, we're pretty flat here in Florida. So our river, St. Johns River, flows backwards. Okay, the mouth, the end is in Jacksonville. The beginning is in South Florida in Palatka. Crazy. So it's a backward flowing. It goes south to north versus north to south. Like, it's not going downward, it's going upward because it's flat. Pretty crazy. All right. So another term for watershed is a drainage basin. A drainage basin is any land where precipitation collects and drains off into a common outlet, such as a river, bay, or other body of water. It's pretty much what I said. So if you see drainage basin, I mean, that's going to be somewhere like a lake. So you got the ocean, you have the mouth, that's where we are, Jacksonville, and then you have the source. So I really like this diagram because it kind of shows you different parts that make this entire watershed. You have the mouth, which is St. Johns River meeting the ocean, which is here in Jacksonville. If you've ever crossed the Main Street Bridge or any of those bridges down Phil Warren, you're at the mouth of the St. Johns River. That's flowing into the ocean. Okay, then you have things called tributaries. We're going to talk about that next. They look like little rivers, but they're not a part of the main river. You see this really thick stream? That is the St. John's. And then you have these tributaries, these little creeks and little rivers next to it. But it all flows down this way. So the source is the start. You see it's the skinniest part. And then you have the main river going down this way. And then you have tributaries, smaller little rivers, streams that are connected to that. So it gets a little bit more complicated than just, there's the river. Especially in Florida, it's a lot more than just one main river. Okay, so we have 3 main basins of the river, like where the water stores. So here's Jacksonville up here. Okay, here's Orange Park, here's Meandering. This is where I am. I'm in here somewhere. I'm over in here. So kind of find where you are. This down here is not a part in St. Augustine going through Jack's Beach. These are not connected to St. John's River. These are intercoastal. This is intercoastal water. So this is still salt, brackish water. But look at the St. John's River. It's going all the way down into Palatka and further. So that's crazy. This is actually one of the basins. So we have the upper, middle, and lower. Based on what I just said, what basin would Jacksonville be located in? Lower. It's in the lower basin. Even though we're more north, we are the lower basin because this is the mouth of the river over here. Okay. Palm Coast is the end of the St. John's, or sorry, the beginning of the St. John's River. Okay. This only shows to Palatka. This is the lower basin. I just focus on where we are. So go all the way down to Palm Coast. My dad lives in that. Again, my dad has. He's a pilot, so he lives in 2 locations. His house in West Palm is actually, we passed the end of the St. John's River, and we've gone in the intercoastal over there when I've gone to visit him. So between me in Jacksonville and my dad in Port St. Lucie, we are still apart and connected through the St. John's River, even though we live 2.5, 3 hours away from each other, which is pretty cool. So the St. John's River goes from Jacksonville down to Palm Coast. Jacksonville is the lower, and then you have Palm Coast, which is the upper, and the middle is like, not Daytona. Yes, is like Palatka, Daytona, going down that way. Pretty cool. Okay, so tributaries. I kind of mentioned them in the 2 slides ago. A tributary is a stream or river that flows into a larger stream or mainstream river or lake. A tributary. Okay, it's contributing or contributing. That's how I like to think of it. It's contributing to the main river. All right, a tributary does not flow directly into an ocean. That's the difference. A main river connects to a large body of water. A tributary doesn't. It's just kind of like an olive branch, like here's some extra water for you. Okay. Tributaries in the mainstream river drain the surrounding drainage basin of its surface water and groundwater, leading the water out into the ocean. Okay, so it's helping push that water outward, draining it in. And if it doesn't drain, Florida's underwater, bro. So it's important. Tributaries are a part and help flow the water outward into the ocean, because if it's not flowing into the ocean, it then doesn't get recycled, recycled back into the water cycle and become rain and precipitation. So if there's no drainage, there's floods, and everything, including us, could like possibly die. All of our animals, there'd be major flooding. It'd be a nightmare if it doesn't flow outward. Because even though it's flowing outward, we don't have to panic and be like, oh my God, we're never going to see this water again. It's called hurricane season. You're going to see that water again. So it has to drain out to reduce flooding, and it comes back to us again when we have those major raining seasons and hurricanes. Okay, so you might be thinking like, well, so is a tributary a spring? Nope. Now, what I'm doing is, we've talked a little about the St. John's River, which is a major part of our watershed. Tributaries are parts of that watershed that are connecting to help drain out. Now, a spring is attached to a tributary, like it's a big puzzle. The river is a big puzzle with multiple pieces, okay? So, no, a spring is not a tributary, they're separate. A spring, a wetland, an aquifer are off of the tributaries, or sometimes not off the tributaries. The river is a big puzzle, and each piece has its own purpose. So you kind of have, step 1 is the main large river, St. John's. Then you have tributaries. I'm going to show you a picture, and this will make a little bit more sense. You have tributaries. You have those olive branches. Like, think of the main river. Think of the main river as the trunk of a tree. Tributaries are the branches. Wetlands are the leaves. Springs are the fruit. Aquifer, I think, is the roots. Okay, that's how a river kind of essentially works. All of these components affect our drinking water. If you are, like, for example, Jenny Springs, okay? Jenny Springs is gross. compared to Itchachutney. In Itchachutney, you can see the spring bottom all the way through, but Jenny Springs has some special rules, and people don't respect because they're allowed to do adult things there that you can't do it in a chutney. People are dirtier there, and I'm just being honest. People are dirtier, and they don't respect the river very well there, or don't respect the spring. So you can't see the bottom of it when you're supposed to, because it's just been trashed and polluted, and it's very popular. So it's kind of trashed out because of that, and that affects us. Because if you are not from Florida and you go to one of our springs and you trash it, you're trashing our water. You're trashing the water that is going to wash my clothes, wash my dishes, go through my sink, be in my shower. I mean, you may not care about your toilet water, but if your dog's drinking out of it, you might. I don't know, just saying. And there is a difference right there. If you've ever been to Jenny Springs and if you've ever been to Itchachutney, there's a dramatic difference between the clarity of the water there because of how people use that spring and what they're doing. Okay. For example, you're going to have a lot more college kids at Jenny Springs than you are at Itchachutney. Just saying. I'm just going to leave that there for you if you didn't get what I was trying to say with that. All these components affect your drinking water. The purpose of a spring or purpose of all of these things can be for drainage, storage, or excess runoff. So how to reduce floods? Okay, so here are all the main tributaries to the St. Johns River. Whoa, there's a lot going on here. And if you notice, they're all named after creeks, rivers. We got a lake, a crescent lake down here. Another one, which isn't on here. I believe this is, I could be wrong. Not Crystal River. No, Crystal River's separate. Yes, don't at me. Crystal River is not a part of our watershed. It is a part of Florida watershed, but not ours. So where are you in this hot mess? Okay, a lot of you guys probably been to Juleton Creek, Goodby Creek. This is all Mandarin right here. Okay, Arlington River, Strawberry Creek, Hogan, Trout River, Ribault River. This is all, what I want to say, like off of San Jose all the way down to downtown. Okay, and then you have the Intercoastal Waterway. Durban is another one people probably have been to. This is going far down, but if you notice, a lot of these little creeks everywhere are here and around the Jacksonville area. I mean, Jacksonville's a huge city. So I would say from Durban up, this is all Drayville, all Jacksonville. So that's a lot of tributaries. They are actually connected to the main river. Okay, so this is when it rains. In this area, all this water is stored and returning to the St. Johns River that is then going out into the ocean. So you may not think you're in Jacksonville when you're out here in Black Creek, but you're contributing to that watershed. So if you pollute a tributary, you pollute the entire watershed. So that's why we should care about them. How is this impacting? Or let's say we're going through a drought, which tributaries are low? They will tell us what's going to affect and impact the St. Johns River if these tributaries start getting low. So it's very important to watch those. All right, another key aspect of the watershed is wetlands. Okay, the purpose of wetlands are to store excess water. This is water that might slowly seep down into the aquifer, or water that cannot go into the aquifer because the sediments underneath are not are impervious, so they can't, impermeable, so they can't be penetrated. They're hard stone that the water can't get through. So wetlands will store that water. It also will store water to reduce excess flooding. So a big issue in Mandarin in the 70s was that they didn't have enough, they got rid of all these wetlands. So when it rained in Mandarin, they'd have serious flooding. Like if you ever go to parts of like Losco Road, things like that, you'll see a lot of people, there's not, that area still floods pretty regularly, especially during hurricane season, and it's because they got rid of all the wetlands. And when they first built there, they didn't put in retention ponds. Retention ponds work as mini wetlands. They store excess water, so that water doesn't flood into your house. So now it's mandatory to preserve and protect wetlands, because if you don't have wetlands and you affect the watershed, especially when you did that Envision and it shows you what happens when there's too much development, that the water can't drain properly, that's what retention ponds are for. That's why, if you notice, every area, what am I thinking of? every home complex or neighborhood typically has some sort of small retention pond. That's to make sure that that excess water does not flow into your house, because it will. That's where it's going to go, which is kind of scary. So wetlands are very important. There's different types. They're great for wildlife. The soil is very unique and very nutrient dense, because remember, it's storing water that hasn't been cleaned yet, water that's about to be cleaned. Very unique vegetation, threats, overpopulation, big time, and preservation. It is illegal to build on wetlands. You can't do it. So if there's a wetland behind your house, perks of that is you're always gonna have wetlands behind your house. It's never gonna go away. Not so great things about having wetland. You're gonna have a lot of skeeters. Mosquitoes are gonna be a nightmare. Risk of water moccasins, things like that. So like, just be safe if you have a wetland behind your house. Just be careful. I wouldn't recommend going trotting around. Just my personal opinion. All right, so storing fresh water. It's nutrient rich, provides habitat for native species, cleaning fresh water, and reduces drought. So if a wetland gets low, we in trouble. If a wetland's getting low, then the tributaries are getting low, the aquifer is low, that is not good. We do not want wetlands to dry out. All right, here's a little trivia question. What is the largest wetland in Florida? This is a picture of it. Give you a second to think about it. It is, that's so cool. But you see how this looks like a main river, and then these are little tributaries? That's what's going on. This is not in our watershed for Jacksonville. The Everglades! It's a massive wetland, and I'm going to go one day in my life, but I also know if I go, I'm going to have to kill some pythons. I'm not ready for that. I mean, I've caught one or two before at Jack Zoo, but yeah, so it's a very special ecosystem. Probably one of my favorite Naked and Afraid is when the dude went to the Everglades. His partner got sick from the snails that they ate. It wasn't cooked all the way, and she got a parasite. Okay, so they're naked in the woods in the Florida Everglades. His partner goes out like the 4th day, and he lasts like the whole 30 days by himself. So like 26 days he's by himself in the Florida Everglades. The dude catches a caiman. Okay, it's like a 4-foot caiman. He creates a smoker, right? So he smokes and makes jerky out of the gator. Then he like uses scales to make arrowheads. And the dude like crushed it. And it's like the Everglades. And then he made like homemade instant. It's like the best. It's the best Naked and Afraid episode ever is the one where the dude's in the Everglades just like crushing it. Like he makes clothes, he like makes a rug for inside of his tent, and the dude's in the Everglades where there's, over 8 species of venomous snakes. You got caiman that will maul your face, serious bugs, gnats. Like, dude was crushing it. Probably my favorite episode. Anyway, so the Florida watershed, the Everglades is really, really unique. I mean, and just in this picture, you're seeing 15 different species, and that's just, yeah. But we'll talk about the Everglades later. But that is the largest water, what's what I'm looking for? Wetland in Florida. It's huge. It's not a part of our watershed for Jacksonville. It's Florida watershed, but not our direct Jacksonville watershed. All right, so now let's at springs. These are actually pictures that I took when we went to Blue Springs, which is a part of the St. Johns River. It's right outside of Placa. So this was still in our watershed, even though I was an hour and 15 minutes away. About an hour and a half away. So there are over 200 springs in Florida. And they argue there actually could be 600. Like they argue that 200 to 600. Most emerging from cavities in the porous limestone of the aquifer to become part of the water system in streams, lakes, and rivers. Most Florida springs are found on the northern half of the state, that's us, and flow from the aquifer. In each picture there are chubby mermaids, aka the sea cow, which are in the sea, or manatees. So here's a manatee right here, and there's some sea cows over here, then there's some sea cows over here. There's over 55 inside the spring, staying warm in the fresh water. Believe it or not, if you look, the banks are really low. So the aquifer isn't like low, like, oh my gosh, we're gonna like not have water. But it's the dry, when we went, it wasn't the rainy season yet. This is in March. So now I guarantee if I went back with all the rain we've had, this bank is probably up at least a foot. It's going to keep continuing through hurricane season. It's going to drain upward, but normally it's full all the way up to here. That's what the park ranger told us. So see these banks right here. The cool thing is because these banks are low, there's a lot more gators that I mean, I didn't see them, but apparently there's more gators. So pretty cool, pretty cool. Okay, so the Floridian Aquifer, this is probably where you guys are like, okay, so you've got the main river, it flows, it's got tributaries, it's got springs, and you got wetlands. And then what's the aquifer? The aquifer is underneath. So remember how I said the river is like, the watershed is like a big tree? Okay, the main river is the trunk, and then you have the tributaries or the branches. Wetlands are the leaves, and what am I missing? Wetlands and spring would be that. And then the aquifer is the roots. It's underneath everything. The aquifer system under Florida provide the majority of the state's water. There are two major aquifers in Florida, the Floridian, which is the whole state, and then the South Florida has their own, and it's very unique because it has to break down a lot of salt water. The Floridian aquifer is the largest and deepest in the state. It holds groundwater like a sponge. Its holes allow the water to move freely through it. Okay, so the aquifer can go up and down. The Floridian aquifer stretches 82,000 square miles beneath Florida and parts of Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina. All right, so what does it look like? So this is where all of your water comes from, all your drinking water comes from. Okay, see how it goes down into there's a spring right here. The springs are pretty deep down. You can hear, like, for example, Devil's Canyon, which I don't recommend going to unless you're an experienced diver and you're with multiple people. They have like those deep caverns in the spring, but they can be attached to the aquifer. But remember, the aquifer, the water could be, down in here or up here. So there are some parts where you can like almost go down into the Florida aquifer. It's not recommended because it can take you, bye, like hasta la pasta, meatball, you gone. So it's pretty interesting how that works. Okay, so here's like what it looks like if you want to see where all of our fresh water is. Okay, it's like a giant sponge for all the rain between the 4 states. So this is the other one down South Florida that take care of all that. This is Lake Okeechobee, in the Gulf of Mexico. So this is, like, think about hurricane season. We have all that excess water. Our aquifer is storing fresh, clean water between these states. So Florida's aquifer impacts these 3 states, especially Georgia. I mean, like almost half of Georgia's aquifer, or half of this aquifer is in Georgia. So it does impact them if something happens to our aquifer. So if, for example, if there was a drought and all this up here was gone, that would be super problematic for all of these states up here. So it's breaking down not just salt water, it's breaking down fresh water, rainwater, hurricane, all that excess water. So it's huge. So when you hear the Florida aquifer, it's not just this one little pocket of water. It's underneath the entire state and other states. So that's like the biggest part. And it's underground. Okay, it's the roots. The water from the rivers, the lakes, it's all storing in here and going back into this fresh water. Okay, it's being naturally filtered and cleaned through sediments. All right, so this is actually a picture I took at that at the springs. So it's talking about how the Blue Spring, and each area is different, how Blue Springs gets its water. So you have the spring here, okay, and here's the aquifer. Wait, but I'm sure you're thinking, why doesn't it look like a giant river underneath here? That's not really how it works. There's pockets of the aquifer throughout Florida. It really depends on the sediment. So you got to be careful when you're building things or you're getting, like, this is a well right here. You have to figure out a way to get down there I mean, you're not going to get a well in here because there's too much hard surface to get through. This is too much sediment, very dense sediment to get through. So it shows you when it rains, the water goes down and is stored in like these small little tributaries right here, and then flows down into the aquifer. And then when the aquifer is full, it flows into the springs. I mean, like super full, like excess water flows in the spring, or vice versa. Okay, the spring is getting low because of evaporation, things like that. the aquifer is going to absorb some of that as well. So it's really interesting how that works. And if you ever go to any of the springs, they'll have pictures like this to explain how water is stored and then contribute to the springs. I mean, you come to the springs at certain times of the year, you're going to see way more manatees farther in the spring because the water is going to be warmer. The water is going to be more full in the spring. So the pictures that I showed you of the manatees, okay, they are actually not, they're in the springs, but they're at the very end of the spring, like where it's connected to the St. Johns River, one of the tributaries. So they're just at the foot of it. They would be much farther down into the aquifer, like in this picture. They would be way more in here, like in the spring area. I mean, they wouldn't be down here, obviously, because then they wouldn't be able to breathe. Okay, they're still mammals. They'd be hanging out down here. But in this picture, they're actually like down in here, and then here's the river. It's a little bit warmer in here, but it's not deep enough for them to go all the way down in here, where they would hang out, you know, form a little pod, chilling. So the amount of water is going to dictate how many animals you have in there, which is pretty cool. Another fun fact that I learned about this spring is the fish were all kind of, you can't really see it. I mean, you can see them right here. All the gars are facing, all the animals or fish are facing one direction because there's not a lot of dissolved oxygen in the fresh water. It's very, very low compared to the rivers because the water's going up and down and everything. So all the fish are facing one direction so that the little bit of oxygen that comes through and passes their gills through the natural flow, because the water is receding away from the aquifer back into the lake, they're all facing one direction. And then you'll see some fish were jumping up and taking gulps of air, which is pretty cool because there's just not enough oxygen in the spring because there's not a lot of water and it's all been sitting in the aquifer for a long period of time. So it's pretty cool. All right. I'm not sure how long this video is. I feel like it's a hot minute, but there you go. That's our watershed all the way down. So I'm going to back it up. Okay, so that's our watershed. I mean, this is an aerial footage of part of our watershed, part of the St. Johns River. So it's really unique. It's really special, all these parts of it. And it's really unique. I mean, I wouldn't be having this conversation if I was teaching in New York because we do have springs, but they're not like, I mean, it's like you find a puddle that is really, really deep and it's a small spring. It's not the same as these massive, grandiose springs that you can go scuba diving in and go in these caverns. I mean, you can dive into the Florida aquifer. I am not brave enough to do that, but you know, if you are, cold start at you. I ain't risking it. So it's really unique. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know it's a hot minute long. I'm not sure how long. Let's see. It's a hot minute, but almost 30 minutes. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know it's a lot. Now you're going to take your quiz. I hope you learned something about your watershed. I hope you can get out there and enjoy it like I have. All right, that's it for me. Thanks, guys. If you have any questions, message me.